All right, so let's take a look here at, we're looking at our sort of, still kind of on the fifth PowerPoint here, just looking at different slides of it. But looking at the overhead squat first, right? So we already kind of talked about this the other day, right? We talked about how like posture is going to be the alignment of all of the different components of our human movement system, right? It's the proper alignment that our skeletal system, our muscular system, you know, how they kind of rest. And then it's also like the alignment of like how those, you know, muscles might be shortening to pull that skeletal system around, right? So as we're looking at this, we know that proper alignment requires like neuromuscular function. It requires like skeletal function. It requires, you know, all of that to kind of be able to work together so that we have, you know, good length tension relationships, right? Without proper posture, we can't move the way that we're really supposed to move, right? Our bones can't move around and pivot the way they're supposed to. They might grind on each other. We talked about that the other day when we were talking about an increase in that Q angle, right? When we look at that static assessment and we see an increased Q angle, which causes like a grinding sensation on our bones, right? We can see here, this is sort of tilting this way. In this version, it's kind of a little bit too flat. Actually, hold on, there's a better picture out there. Yeah, we can kind of see this version here, right? We see ideally this is good, right? There's a normal Q angle where the distribution of the bone is pretty even. Over here, there's a big gap. Over here, there's a big gap. So that's not exactly what we're looking for, right? You know, this isn't what we want. This is going to cause like, you know, aches and pains or movement dysfunctions, pulled muscles, you know, things like that. So we want to have a strategy for assessing these alterations in length tension relationships. And then we want to have a strategy for like, you know, building a program that's going to fix this. And so that's where we are looking at the idea of like, you know, performing a fitness assessment on our client, observing their posture, figuring out what's going on, and then writing a program that is going to sort of address that. So with that, we call those misalignments, we call those our predictable patterns of muscle imbalance, right? And there's a couple of the key ones that we're going to look for. We saw that like in the static assessments, we were looking for, you know, the feet turn out, the feet flatten. So we see that pronation, the knees caving in, right? We see that knee valgus, anterior tilting. Sometimes we look for posterior tilting, shoulder rounding, and a forward head posture. So we're either going to see pronation distortion syndrome, lower cross syndrome, or upper cross syndrome. And that's all of those things are important to pay attention to, because that just means that like that's somebody whose muscles are a little bit overly developed on one side of a joint. And a little bit underdeveloped on the other side of the joint. And so they have an imbalance there, right? So as we're talking about this, right, we are going to be talking about how there are going to be our overactive muscles. These are tight, shortened muscles that basically are pulling more than they are supposed to, or they're pulling when they're not supposed to. Sometimes people think of it like a lot of times, like we can explain it to our clients is like, yeah, you've got one muscle that's too strong and another muscle that's not strong enough, right? That's a good, simple explanation, but it's not necessarily 100% accurate, because even that overactive muscle is weaker than it's supposed to be, right? The sarcomere is already contracted, so its ability to contract further is going to be, you know, limited. It's going to be reduced. So we see these imbalances, these alterations, right? So those are the postural distortions we already kind of talked about. Now, moving slightly past that really quick and going into the overhead squat, which is sort of the new ones, right? We're looking at some movement observations, right? Those static assessments are assessments that you perform when your client is, you know, staying put. Well, we're today going to spend a little bit more time talking about our dynamic assessments. Dynamic movement assessments are where we put a little bit more stress on the body. We actually have our client squat down and see, you know, how they do it, or we have them do a pushing or a pulling action and see how they do it, or maybe we have them balance. And all of that is going to tell us even further information about these overactive, underactive muscles. So I want to have a pretty clear understanding of like our foundation here. I want what we're talking about. When we say we have a muscle that's an overactive muscle, this is a muscle that is in a shortened or partially contracted state, right? So when we think about like if a client has their knees caving in, what is causing that? Well, that's the adductor muscles, which, you know, your adductors are responsible for caving your knees in. Your adductor muscles are contracted. They're in a shortened state, right? So then we just have to look to the opposite side of the joint a lot of times to look at our underactive muscle. And that underactive muscle, you know, what is opposite of the adductors? Well, that's going to be your gluteus maximus, right? There are underactive muscles or muscles that are in a lengthened or partially relaxed state. If your client's knees are caving in, the medial glute, the gluteus medius, which does hip abduction, is in a lengthened state. So when we look at that, right, and we see knees cave in. When we see like the knees caving in, we know that the muscles that pull the knee inward are basically kind of bunched up like this, and the muscles that are, you know, pulling the knee outward are sort of lengthened out like this. They're underactive, right? So that's what's causing those alterations in our posture. I was kind of hoping for like a, can't really see what I want. Let's see here. Try knee valgus. Yeah, I'm not gonna get it. I miss having a whiteboard. So if we see this, right, we know that certain muscles are basically just pulling too much and the other ones are not pulling enough. So that is going to be what's happening, right? The inner thigh is squeezing and now the outer thigh really can't squeeze, can't do anything. So that is what happens in our classic version of an overactive, underactive situation. But sometimes it's not always the opposite muscle. Sometimes it's not necessarily just a muscle that is antagonistic to which direction you're moving. Sometimes it can also be an example of like a synergist muscle, like a helper muscle that's stepping in and doing too much work. So that's where we kind of need to look at like really what's causing these alterations. Sometimes, you know, for instance, like when we look at like an anterior pelvic tilt, right? Like your erector spinae is not necessarily supposed to do spinal stabilization. That's not really its job. It is, you know, when we look at anterior tilt and we see these overactive muscles in the low back, right? We're seeing this kind of dumping action where the erector spinae, actually, that was a good picture right there. The erector spinae is really tight, right? Their lumbar spine. So it's pulling them back even further. This is a low back muscle, but it's not the type of low back muscle that's responsible for stabilizing your spine. Like it's supposed to help with your low back, but it also moves your low back, right? Whereas like, you know, your multifidus, which are all the little tiny muscles that live between your spine. It lives underneath your erector spinae. Like if we look, there's our multifidus. If we look at the erector spinae, you'll see it lays over top. So these two muscles are supposed to work together. The erector spinae is supposed to be over top. The multifidus is supposed to be underneath, and their job is to like, you know, stabilize and move your spine. But if you are using that mover muscle a little bit too much, it's going to cause an alteration in your posture, right? These are supposed to be synergists, right? They're supposed to be helper muscles, but unfortunately, you've got one that's basically doing too much work, right? And so now your helper muscle is taken over and your main muscle really can't do its job. So we have terms for each of these sort of different versions, right? It's either going to be an antagonist on the opposite side of the joint doing too much work, or sometimes it's a synergist doing too much work. But either way, those muscles are overactive and the muscles that are supposed to be working are underactive. But we do have some terms here that are going to describe that. So these are some really key terms here, guys. I know they're a little technical. You know, the names sometimes are a little bit hard to memorize, but you guys have to have these memorized for sure. Like these are some vocabulary terms that I can promise you NASM is going to use. So the first one that we're going to see is altered reciprocal inhibition. Okay. And that is the classic example of the muscle on the opposite side of the joint. Okay. Altered reciprocal inhibition is your classic example of like, oh, my glutes can't fire properly because my hip flexors are pulling too tight, right? And those two are total opposites of each other, like Batman versus the Joker, right? So this is where an overactive muscle, or an overactive, and we'll say agonist because it's the muscle that we're talking about, an overactive agonist decreases the neural drive of its antagonist, right? It is literally the classic one side of a joint to the other, you know? So if we see the erector spinae on the low back, well, then we would go straight over to the other side of the joint and look at our transverse abdominis, right? With the altered reciprocal inhibition, we literally jump from one side of the joint to the other. So we're on the back of the skeleton here. We move to the front of the skeleton. We know exactly what muscles are underactive. In your calf muscles, let's say like you have an overactive gastrocnemius. If we have an overactive gastrocnemius, which is here in the back of the calf, well, if we look at our anterior tibialis, that's directly on the opposite side of the joint. So if your gastrocnemius is really tight and your anterior tibialis can no longer contract, this muscle here will inhibit straight over to the other side of the joint, this muscle right here, right? So that's altered reciprocal inhibition. The reason we call it that, let's go ahead and break this definition down, right? What it means, right, when we look at this, altered reciprocal inhibition. So you have, your body is arranged naturally to have one muscle on one side of a joint and another muscle on the other side of the joint, and they're designed to work back and forth, right? That's every muscle you've got has an antagonist. There's not any muscle. The only exception in your entire body is pretty much your diaphragm. That's really the only muscle that, like, you know, doesn't have like a muscle that's basically doing the exact opposite. But you have like every mover muscle, every skeletal muscle that you have on the opposite side of the joint, a muscle that's going to do exactly the opposite. You get your upper traps, it goes like this. You get your lower traps, they go like this. You get your biceps, it goes like this. You get your triceps, they do that, right? Everything has an exact opposite. Otherwise, we'd never be able to get back to neutral. So your nervous system is designed purposefully to only contract one side of a joint at a time, right? When one muscle contracts, the antagonist on the other side of the joint is going to instinctively relax. That physiologic process is what we call reciprocal inhibition. One muscle is reciprocating the other muscle by turning itself off. It's inhibited, right? It turns itself off. I don't want, like right now, guys, bend your elbow like this, and now try to squeeze your bicep as hard as you can, but extend your elbow. It's impossible. You literally can't do it, right? Like you cannot contract this and this simultaneously. If you did, you would just stay put, right? You would create stabilization. So if we want to move, we need one muscle to contract and we need the other muscle to relax. That process is reciprocal inhibition, right? If I'm doing a crunch, I need my low back to let go so that I can, you know, squeeze my abs. And when I descend back down to the ground, I need my low back to contract and I need my abs to let go. And that's how we are going to create actual movement. So if that's reciprocal inhibition, that's normal reciprocal inhibition. It happens in your body constantly all day long, every movement you make, right? Well, if that's the case, then you have, when we look at altered reciprocal inhibition, basically what it means is we've screwed up that relationship. Now we've got this muscle that's like, you know, let's say it's like an overactive bicep muscle because it's easy for me to show here, right? So your bicep contracts and now it's time for your tricep to contract to pull you back the other way. But your bicep's like, nope, I'm not going to let go. I'm just going to keep contracting. right? I'm a tight muscle. I have scar tissue or something, right? Well, now that muscle is going to have a harder time relaxing because you are now pulling in the opposite direction. And not only is that going to reduce your mobility, it's going to reduce your strength. Because imagine it this way. We're going to use some fake numbers here, but I think numbers kind of highlight what I'm talking about pretty well. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, you have an overactive bicep muscle, and it is passively contracting all day long, nonstop, for, let's say, 5 pounds of force, right? Your bicep won't stop generating a minimum of 5 pounds. So then you go to the gym and you're trying to do your tricep extensions, and and let's just say that this bicep tightness that you've got, this 5 pound contraction thing, this only started recently. This is a brand new phenomenon. Maybe it's because you pulled something, you pulled a bicep tendon, and now you're back at the gym after your injury has kind of healed and stuff, right? So you go and you know exactly how much you can do on a tricep extension. You grab the pin, you put it to, I don't know, we'll say the 50 pound mark, right? So you put that on the 50 pound mark and you go to do your tricep extensions, and you find that you just can't really move those freaking plates. You're like, man, I was able to do 50 pounds before my bicep injury. What's happening in my triceps? Why are my triceps not contracting as much? Well, remember, we said our bicep was contracting for 5 pounds of force passively. So you don't need 50 pounds of force in order to do that tricep extension. You need 55 pounds of force to do that tricep extension, because you are losing 5 pounds of force generation in the exact opposite direction. This is why overactive muscles are inhibiting our underactive muscles on the other side of the joint. When your hip flexors are passively pulling your pelvis downward, when your hip flexors are really, really tight, hip flexion is exactly the opposite of hip extension. So your glutes are trying to fire as hard as they can, but they literally can't. They are losing a passive amount of force in the exact opposite direction that you are intending to move. Does that make sense, everybody? Does that kind of analogy break down clearly for everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I would honestly say that if I had to break down one thing that to learn, like maybe in the whole textbook, I would say this is it. I mean, all of it's important. I'd say, actually, probably the most important would be to absorb the fact that you should just be active in general. But the thing that really helps you understand muscles very clearer than anything else is kind of what we're talking about right now. So that's altered reciprocal inhibition. It's this one muscle that's passively contracting and it won't let go. So now your other muscle can't do its job, So what ends up happening when that happens? Human beings, we are very stubborn. So we're going to try and get the job done anyways, right? So now let's say it's that, we'll keep using that tricep extension as an example, right? How many of you guys have seen somebody doing tricep extensions? And they should kind of look like this, right? You should be having an ever so slight lean forward, and it should be like this kind of kick down motion that kind of looks like this. How many times have you seen somebody do this though? Where they actually kind of contract their shoulders down like this, or they'll move their abs, right? That's an example of all right, well, I wasn't able to get the job done with the muscle that was supposed to do all the work, right? I wasn't able to get that done. So now I'm using other muscles to get the job done. So now what's going to happen is synergist muscles, or, in the case like that tricep extension, just totally just the wrong muscles. But generally what's going to happen is a synergist muscle is going to come in and try to take over and say, well, we got to get this job done. We need to finish this, let's say, squat, right? So now some muscle that is supposed to maybe help with squatting is going to take over, and it's going to try to do most of the work, right? So in the case of if we were looking here, right, if we were looking at the transverse abdominis, the erector spinae is really doing more work than it's supposed to. Transverse abdominis is being inhibited. Well, now you might have some other muscles that kind of step in to take over. This could be in the form of like your quadratus lumborum. That's your QL. These muscles in the low back right here. They might try to do a little bit of like stabilization, but they're really not designed to do it, right? They're really designed to do like lateral movements like this. So maybe you end up like with a twisting action, and that's probably going to lead to an injury or something. But let's take a look at the glutes, right? Let's say your gluteus maximus, which is this huge glute muscle back here. It's being inhibited, right? You are trying to do a squat. This muscle is trying to do, that hip extension in the squat, but it's just not able to because let's say your rectus femoris, the antagonist, this is a hip flexor muscle, won't stop contracting. Boy, we're getting really lucky with Ken Hub pictures today. So this rectus femoris right here, won't stop contracting. So this is inhibiting this, right? Total opposite side of the joint. So now a synergist muscle is going to try to come in. Those synergists are going to be your hamstrings in the glute. They're going to try to take over. Those hamstring muscles are, they assist in hip extension. They do a little bit of it, but it could also end up being your adductor complex. So your adductors are these muscles on the inside part of the thigh. You've got a couple of them that actually can do a little bit of hip extension. Most of them perform hip flexion. But you've got this adductor, let's see here, adductor magnus, which actually does hip extension. It's this big webbing fiber right here. Like you've got like the long ones that are kind of running all the way down. The magnus, you can actually see, if you look really carefully at this picture, you see this little like flap back here at the very top. That's actually the posterior section of the fibers. And that's the part that's in charge of hip extension, the posterior side of those adductor magnus fibers. So, that's a great picture right there. So you can see like now this muscle is going to try to take over for this glute that really was, the glute was supposed to be doing most of the work, but he's sleeping on the job now. Or more accurately, he's not sleeping. I mean, he is sleeping on the job, but he's been knocked out by the hip flexors, like conked on the back of the head. And so now your glute can't do its work. So these adductor muscles are going to fire instead. And guess what? They're going to help. They're going to successfully do a little bit of that hip extension. But the problem is, they also adduct the knee. They don't only do hip extension. The problem with using a synergist to get the job done is that synergist, number one, has, already got a job to do. And now it's focused on doing something that it's not really designed to do. And number two, it also, when it contracts, is going to drag the bone in the direction that it normally wants to travel. So what's going to happen is those adductors, they're not just going to do hip extension to help solve this problem. They're also going to adduct the knee. And you're going to get a client who performs a squat like this. They're going to squat down with their knees caving in, kind of like this, right? Which doesn't look terrible. This doesn't look all that bad when you look at it, but if you pay attention to the alignments, right, we can see there's this inward angle of the thighs here, right? And the foot's sort of turning out. There's not an even amount of tracking. This kneecap lands right about here when it should be lining up with the middle of the toe. You can see here, this kneecap is now pointing straight down and it's coming straight to the center of the foot. That's what we want to see. So, there's a really extreme version. That's much easier to spot. So that not so great, right? That's where synergistic dominance starts to be a problem. Your synergist muscle starts to contract for more than it's supposed to, and that synergist now draws your skeleton into improper alignment. And Eventually, now that muscle gets so used to contracting and it gets so tight that you end up like using it more often than you're supposed to. You end up with synergistic dominance, which is where a synergist will take over for a weak or inhibited prime mover. So now we've got one muscle on one side of the joint that's pulling and inhibiting our agonist. We've got a helper muscle that's coming in that's not really helping, it's in fact taking over, and that's not good either. So now we have altered reciprocal inhibition and we have synergistic dominance, and that's going to lead to us moving the wrong way. We are going to end up with what we call relative flexibility, which is like, it's like it's in the title, right? It's all relative, the body will find the path of least resistance during a movement. It's like, are you flexible? And it's like, yeah. And it's like, well, prove it. Can you touch your toes? And then they're like, yeah, I'm flexible. Of course I can touch my toes. And maybe they do it like this. See, I'm touching my toes. And it's like, that's not what I meant. Like I meant, can you hinge at the waist, right? Well, relative to this person, yeah, they're flexible enough, right? They figured out a way to get the job done. So that's kind of what relative flexibility is. It's the body finding the path of least resistance. It does what it's kind of naturally good at, or maybe what it has been doing every day for 8 hours a day. If you're a client or if you're a person who wears an elevated heel while you're at work, right? That's going to lead to tight calf muscles. So your body's going to use your calf muscles more than it's going to use something else. And you're going to find a way to get the job done with your tight calves. So now you have relative flexibility. So we can spot all of those things. Like these things can be spotted. Obviously, we talked about this. We talked about overactive, underactive muscles when we were looking at static assessments the other day, right? But it becomes especially apparent when you perform dynamic postural assessments that involve movement. And so this is where the first one we're going to look at is called our overhead squat. And actually, really quickly, let's get the definition of dynamic assessment. So static postural assessments are postural assessments that take place with no movement, right? Well, dynamic postural assessments are postural assessments that relate to the basic functions such as squatting, pushing, pulling, or balancing. And they put specific types of stress on the kinetic chain. So we're looking to see if, the kinetic chain breaks down. There's another assessment that we don't teach you guys that's actually that I think Mo likes to go over as like a bonus. What's it called? Upper body assessment, scratch. What's it called? Aptly scratch. So there's an assessment called the aptly scratch assessment, which is kind of funny because I freaking hate this thing because I wish I were better at it. And this is actually an upper body mobility assessment. This is a shoulder range of motion assessment. And basically, you can see here, what you're going to do is you're going to try to reach up with both arms and try to touch your fingertips behind your upper back. Ideally, this should be even on both sides, but here you can see like this version, it's nice and loose, but like this version, like overhead movements are easy for this guy, but this internal movement right here, as he kind of scoops around, is clearly a real struggle, right? And I totally identify with this because if you look, I got the same thing, right? Like that's not so bad. And then I can't get my freaking right arm up there. And that means that I need to work on my, right arm mobility. So that's the aptly scratch assessment. This is not one that's in your textbook, by the way. This is not something that you're going to learn. I think honestly, Mo likes to do this one, like just as like kind of a bonus. Mo likes to throw a lot of bonus stuff your way. That's like his favorite thing. But anyway, what we're looking at, we see like there's a really big distinct difference between like his left and right sides, right? So, this is an assessment that involves like trying to move these joints through a full range of motion. And that's what dynamic assessments are. They're assessments that move through a full range of motion, and they are used to put specific types of stress on the body rather than just like a static assessment, which is just sort of looking at the structural alignment of someone when they're in like a neutral position. So the big one, the king of assessments, is going to be our overhead squat analysis, right? This is a postural assessment that's designed to assess your dynamic flexibility, dynamic meaning movement, and your integrated total body strength. So integrated total body strength is where we're looking, basically the overhead squat puts stress on most of your joints up your entire kinetic chain. It puts stress on the ankle, the knee, the lumbopelvic hip complex, the shoulders, and a little bit on the cervical spine, but not really. So it's almost everything, right? And so you're going to instruct your client to stand with feet shoulder width apart, toes pointed straight forward. I know that we can always do like some, I know that we do like barbell squatting with like slight feet turn out so you can drive the knees away. That is great because it puts your femur in a really good position. I love that. But with this version, we want to have our feet just in a neutral position and instruct your client to do this with their shoes off. We do not want, if they're wearing, let me see if I can do this. I'm just going to picture, I'm just going to Google Nikes. Look at this monstrosity. You can see like how much freaking padding, or look at, oh my God. Oh, is this the Back to the Future? Yeah, it's the Back to the Future shoe. All right, well, actually, this shoe is awesome, and I will say nothing about it because I freaking love that movie. But take a look here, right? Look at how much thicker the heel is compared to the front. That is literally putting the foot into plantar flexion. This is similar to wearing high heels. And it's not just Nike. I will evenly spread the blame around. Actually, that's a lifting shoe. That's actually almost like a freaking platform shoe for powerlifting and stuff. But yeah, look at this huge freaking padding on the back. So what that does is that literally puts you into plantar flexion. Actually, let's see here. If I Google like modern shoe plantar flexion, what comes up on Google? And not much. But yeah, we are seeing like, a lot of like padding back here, right? So it puts you into these, major like plantar flexed positions. That's a very extreme example there. But that means that you're not moving the way you're intended. That is going to mean that you cannot really move the way you're supposed to. So if we're trying to like measure someone's ideal squat, we don't need to see them when they're getting help with plantar flexion. We want to see them when they're in a neutral position. So always have your clients take their shoes off. Then you're going to have them raise their arms overhead with elbows fully extended. Now, I will say this PowerPoint does this weird thing. This lady has a freaking fantastic overhead squat, but she does do palms forward, which NASM does not specifically say. Most of your clients, when you are doing the overhead squat, you can have, assessment, not exercise. When you're doing this, you can have your hands in a neutral position. There's nothing wrong with you can do the palms forward thing, but you can also, actually, God, we're seeing a lot of palms forward versions. You can also have your palms just in a neutral position like this. That's totally fine. So we are looking at having them raise their arms completely overhead, elbows fully extended. The upper arm should bisect your ear. Your arm should be in alignment directly with your ear. And then you're going to have them squat to a comfortable position, as if they are sitting back into a chair, and have them repeat. So what we're looking at here, we can see this is a pretty darn good overhead squat. This is a pretty ideal example, right? She's got a pretty natural lumbar arch. Her arms are obviously bisecting her ears very well. We are not seeing an excessive lean. You can see here, if we look at the angle from her shin to her ankle, or her knee to her ankle rather, and we draw a line from her pelvis up her arm, up her upper body, these lines are perfectly parallel. They're not going to cross over one another. Like I just saw, you know, yeah, this is an example. This is not such a great overhead squat. This is an excessive lean, right? These are almost parallel, right? But here they're crossing over one another. That is, you know, sort of that's an excessive lean. That's real bad. Oh my God, there we go. Look at that nonsense. So that's going to be either caused by tight calves or tight hip flexors. We'll see in just a second. So here are our movement compensations. So this is what you guys need to kind of pay really close attention to. You're going to observe things from an anterior view and a lateral view. And then for the record, you are also going to do a posterior view once you get to capstone. Posterior view is not in the regular edition of the NASM. It's only in the corrective exercise book. But I do want to go over it today just because you're going to see it eventually anyways. But if we're looking at the anterior view, what you're going to pay attention to, you are going to look at the foot and ankle complex, and you're going to look at the knee complex. From the side view, you're going to look at the lumbopelvic hip complex and the shoulders. And from the posterior view, you're also going to look at the ankles, and you're going to look at the lumbopelvic hip complex to see if there's any asymmetric shifts. So from the anterior view, what we're looking for, and you can actually find these charts at NASM's website, nasm.org. If you go to their website and you go down here to the resources tab, or downloads tab, I should say, and you go over here, aside from all these really awesome free courses, there are also, let's see here, dynamic posture assessment. Where are you at? This is static, is that? All right, well, that's not just static. Okay, they need to fire their website guy. So you can see here, if we take a look at the overhead squat, and we look at it, right, from the foot and ankle complex, we're going to ask ourselves, does our client's feet turn out? Yes or no, right? We're going to ask ourselves, do our client's knees cave in? Yes or no? Do they, and then that's going to be your anterior view. From the lateral view, you're going to look to see, and by the way, this is what that looks like, right? This is an example of the feet turning out. That's a really extreme example. But then there's an example of the knees caving in, right? Then you're going to look from the lateral view and ask yourself, does your client excessively lean forward, like we're seeing here, or do they have an excessive low back arch? A lot of times, one of the ways that I like to spot a low back arch is I honestly just reverse this idea. If these lines are going to cross in the back, that sometimes indicates an excessive, we'll see an excessive lean where the lines cross up here, and during an excessive low back arch, you'll sometimes see the exact opposite, where this will be sort of an inadequate forward lean. And then we also see, do the arms fall forward? Are they staying in line with the body, or do they drop, right? So we've got three things to look for in two spots, right? We're going to pay attention to the lumbopelvic hip complex, where we look to see, is it arching or is it leaning forward? And then we're also going to look at the shoulder complex to see if the arms are falling, right? And so you can see, like, excessive forward lean, yes or no, low back arch, yes or no, arms fall forward, yes or no. And then you would do a posterior view as well, which they don't have on here. But let's see here, NASM overhead. From the posterior view, you're basically going to look for two things, or three things. You're going to look to see, do the feet flatten, because it's very easy to see from the back. You're looking to see if the heels rise. This one's actually kind of a pain in the butt to fix, but it's actually a very, very, very simple problem. Literally, if their heels are popping up off the floor, tight soleus. It's very simple answer. But fixing a tight soleus, pain in the freaking rear. That thing takes forever to stretch out. So that's the heels rising. And then we have an asymmetric shift. We look to see, are they kind of sitting into one side? Are they being pulled too far this way? This is probably the biggest pain in the butt problem that you'll run into, which is why I think they keep it out of the regular edition of the NASM and they only put it in the corrective. Because this asymmetry is being caused by, the tightness in the muscles are not just like, it's not just like weak glutes and tight hip flexors, right? That's an easy problem. This is like a tight glute over here and a weak glute over here. Oops, sorry, I actually had that backwards. Sorry. A weak glute over here and a tight glute over here. So you need to stretch this side, but strengthen this side. And then you need to like look and see how, okay, well, this is adduction happening on this side and abduction happening on this side. So you actually have to like stretch your client asymmetrically, which can be kind of a pain in the rear. And that's why this isn't in your regular text. Looking at the regular text, if we're just paying attention to these kind of 5 key movements, right? Feet turn out, knees cave in, excessive lean, low back arch, or arms fall forward. Well, we need to memorize like which muscles are most overactive. What are causing this? What's our probable overactive muscles, right? So if we look at the feet turning out, actually, sorry, I'm gonna show you the video first. Forget my whole lesson plan. All right, so we've got a little video here that's going to walk you guys through feet turning out and knees caving in. So this is going to be a little bit of a longer video. The other 2 after this are actually really short, but here is sort of like how to address this. This is both going to look, this is going to look at both sides of the joint. We're going to look at how to stretch the overactive stuff, or inhibit it, and we're going to look at how to activate the underactive stuff, or sort of activate it, right? So here we go.
Let's look at a movement preparation program.
I always forget every single time. Share the audio. There we go.
Designed specifically for your client. So what we'll begin with is looking at the overhead squat assessment. So we'll ask Claire to first of all align her 5 kinetic chain checkpoints. We want to be sure the feet are approximately hip width apart, toes pointing straight ahead. The knees are going to be aligned with the second and third toe. Hips are going to be neutral. Go ahead and reach both of the hands all the way overhead. So to begin here, we're going to look at the anterior view. And with the anterior view, we're looking specifically at the feet and the knees. So as soon as you're ready, go ahead and squat to about the height of a normal chair, and we're going to repeat maybe 5 repetitions. So as she lowers down, we can begin to see the feet are turning out, knees are coming in, toes are also starting to come up. We'll go ahead and just have her do 1 more. And you can go ahead and relax. We can clearly see those compensations, so what we'll do now is go ahead and move on to our program. We know that if the feet turn out and the knees come in, our calves are going to be overactive, as well as the adductors. So let's go ahead and foam roll those. So we'll grab our foam roller, go ahead and take a seat on the ground, position the roller here with the foot right in the center. The opposite leg will come over top for extra compression. If for any reason you need to reduce the compression, if it's too painful, you can uncross the leg here. Now we'll raise the hips, and we'll slowly begin to roll towards the knee. Remember, about 1 inch per second, keeping the foot relaxed. You can set the hips down there and reposition the hands. When you find a tender spot, something that you identify as tender, you're going to stop and hold. We're going to hold this position for 20 to 30 seconds or until the tenderness starts to reduce, so be sure you breathe. Try to relax the muscle. You can go ahead and relax there. What you would do is perform that on the other side. Now we're going to move on to the adductor. So we'll position the foam roller here. You'll go into a face down position, or prone position. The legs positioned in the center of the roller, there on the adductor. Elbows are in front of the body, right below the shoulders, maintaining the compression here on this side. Now again, a nice slow roll towards the midline of the body, so you'll slowly start to roll your body out. Whenever you find that most tender spot, you're going to stop and hold. Remember, just maintain the compression. Be sure you're breathing. Big, deep breaths allows the body to relax. Hold that for 20 to 30 seconds, and then you would repeat on the other side. Now we're going to move into our static stretch. We'll begin by statically stretching the calf, the same areas we foam rolled. So from here, just go into a staggered stance position. We'll focus again on our kinetic chain checkpoints. So here we'll slightly internally rotate. We'll engage the quadricep, engage the glutes, keep a neutral position here with the spine. Now by bending that right knee, slowly go to where you reach that first point of tension, and then you're going to hold for 20 to 30 seconds. And remember, a static stretch is not supposed to hurt. There may be some discomfort at that end range, but it should not be painful. After that 30 seconds, you would repeat the same thing on the other side. Now what we'll do is go to our adductor stretch. So here, feet nice and straight. We'll go into a wide stance. She's stretching her left side adductor. So this right foot's going to be positioned slightly in the front. Right heel is aligned with the left toe. Again, she will contract the quadricep on that side. Hands on the hips. Tuck the butt underneath as you engage the glute. Then from here, we're going to bend the right knee. She's lengthening that left adductor. Take to the first point of tension, and then you're going to stop and hold. And again, there may be some discomfort, but we don't want pain. After that 30 seconds, you would repeat the same thing on the other side. Now, following along with the OPT model, we're going to go into our core, balance, and reactive. And this is really where we get into that movement prep. So what we'll begin with is a floor bridge. We know if the feet turn out and the knees go in, the glutes are probably not doing their job. We'll go into a supine position. Hands are going to be to the sides with the palms rotated up. That allows us to relax the shoulders. 5 kinetic chain checkpoints, so feet, knees, and hips are all in alignment. Neutral position with the spine, neutral position with the shoulders. So I'll ask Claire to go ahead and slide her feet a little bit closer to her hips. Now from here, while maintaining equal pressure across the foot, let's lift the hips for about a second, following our 4-2-1 tempo. We'll hold for 1, 2, and now we have a 4-second eccentric. So lower for 4, 3. Notice how she maintains a neutral position here with the spine. 2, 1, and we'll drive back up. Contract the glutes at the top. Hold for 1, 2, down for 4, 3, a little bit faster on the way down. 2, 1, and drive up. Contract the glutes. Hold for 1, 2, down for 4, 3, 2, 1. If for any reason you're feeling too much in the quad, you can extend your legs out slightly, and you can repeat there. If you begin to feel too much in the hamstring, then you can simply slide the foot back closer, and you would repeat that for 12 to 20 reps. Now we're going to move into a side plank. So keep in mind, those knees caved in, so now we're going to engage that lateral side of the body. So we'll go into a side plank position. So elbow is going to be beneath the shoulder. Notice how her ankles, knees, and hips are stacked. She's going to contract the quads, squeeze the glutes, keep the abdominals here engaged. We're focusing on core stabilization, and we would maintain this position for about 20 seconds. You can go ahead and relax there, and you would repeat on the other side. Now we're moving from core stabilization to balance stabilization. So let's go ahead and stand. Whenever we do balance, we're trying to focus on the client's balance threshold. So to begin, what I'll ask Claire to do is put her hands on her hips, 5 kinetic chain checkpoints, feet are straight, knees are in alignment, hips are neutral, shoulders are relaxed, and head is positioned appropriately. Now I want you to shift your weight to your left leg and just barely pick the right foot off the ground. Our focus here is the stabilization leg. We want to be sure that she's maintaining a neutral position in the arch. Now remember, I said balance threshold. If this is too easy for her, what I'm going to ask her to do is drop down to about 1/3 of a squat. Right there, perfect. And we'll notice that's a little bit more challenging for her. So I'm going to have her hold this position for 20 seconds. You can go ahead and relax there. You would repeat on the other leg. Now we'll move on to our reactive stabilization. Here we're focusing on landing mechanics. We're not trying to get you to jump super high. We want to be sure that your landing is perfect. So let's begin again with those 5 kinetic chain checkpoints. Everything's nice and straight. Whenever you land, you're going to hold for 3 to 5 seconds. This gives you an opportunity to tell your nervous system where you want things to go. So if you land with your feet out, you just bring your feet in to where they're nice and straight, hold that position, and then jump again. So let's begin by coming down into a slight squat. While using the hands, go ahead and jump. Perfect, land. Let's look at the feet. Very good job. Notice how she pulled them in straight. The knees there are properly aligned. And let's repeat, let's jump. Very good, let's take a look at the feet. Realign them. So here you're telling the nervous system, this is the position I need you to land in. And let's go again. Perfect, you can go ahead and relax there. You would repeat that 8 to 10 times. And that gives you your movement prep. We did the foam rolling, we did the static stretching, we did some core activation, some balance, and some reactive training. So from here, you can either repeat that up to 3 times, or you can move right into the resistance portion.
That's kind of fun. He just goofed a little bit. It is 5 to 8 times if your client's in stabilization, by the way. I've shown this video like a million times. I've never noticed that before. All right. So we could see, right, like he took her through a little bit of foam rolling. That's going to inhibit those overactive muscles. Then he static stretched those overactive muscles. And then he flipped to the other side of the joint and started activating her underactive muscles using our movement prep section of sort of our workout. So everybody in here except Lorianne, you're the only one who hasn't actually seen our OPT workouts, but this is sort of like when we're writing a workout, this is sort of like how we flow it. We flow it through like a warm-up section, and then we go into this movement prep stuff where we activate that, right? So that's what we were seeing in that video there, right? He went through, and during the warm-up section, he addressed her overactive muscles. And then during the movement prep section, he activated her underactive muscles. He got those muscles that, you know, were being turned off, turned back on. So in a foot turn out situation, you can actually see that here. If we scroll down, you can see if your client's feet turn out, your probable overactive muscles are going to be the soleus, the gastrocnemius, and the hamstring complex. Particularly your biceps femoris short head is going to be really the big one there. But look at the hamstrings. We know that there are sort of 2 sides to them, right? I don't know why we need a back view. That's just confusing. Just give me. Ooh, do I like that? I like that. So we can see here, you've got your medial hamstring. These are the 2 muscles that are on the inside portion of your thigh. And then you've got your lateral hamstring, that's your biceps femoris. This is the one that causes external rotation. So a lot of times when your clients like feet turn out, it's not the inside part of the hamstring that's overactive, it's the outside part of the hamstring. So when we're focusing on like hamstring stretches, that's the part we want to target. And then one that they're not including on here because it's the basic list is the TFL. The TFL is also going to be very commonly overactive in clients whose feet turn out, especially when the knees cave in simultaneously. So a lot of times feet turning out and knees caving in happen kind of simultaneously, which is why we're going to see the TFL show up. That often deserves to be on both lists. But again, this is sort of the watered down version. So in the watered down version, it looks a little bit more like that. So then we've got probable underactive muscles. You know, we've got to get our feet turned back to neutral. Why did the feet turn out? Because some muscles were contracting. Well, which muscles weren't contracting enough to pull the joint back to neutral? Well, those are your underactive muscles, right? So if it was your lateral gastrocnemius before, well, then it's going to be your medial gastrocnemius this time, right? If we look at that gastrocnemius muscle, your calf, it's got 2 heads to the fibers there, right? You've got a lateral side and a medial side. In clients who are feet turning out, this lateral side tends to be very, very overactive, and this medial side tends to be very underactive. I'm actually going to pull up, hold on. I'm going to pull up the advanced list. That's a little bit better to work from. There we go. So we see the feet turn out. That's soleus, the lateral gastrocnemius, so your calves, biceps femoris, and TFL are all overactive. And then your underactive is the medial gastrocnemius and the medial hamstring, right? So we just need to flip straight over to the other side of the joint. Again, like we see this problem, you know, it's not always an antagonist muscle, right? This is an example of synergistic dominance where the lateral gastrocnemius is doing too much work. You know, this won't stop contracting. And now your medial gastrocnemius can't do it. Your biceps femoris, which is your lateral hamstring, is doing too much work, and your medial hamstring can't do enough. Then we look at the TFL, which is that tight hip muscle. That's going to inhibit your glutes, your gluteus maximus and medius. We're also seeing a little bit of underactivity in what is called your gracilis, which is this little stabilizer muscle on the inside portion. That's a spider. Is there a gracilis spider? On the inside here, you can see like this little stabilizer here can sometimes cause the feet to turn out if it's not properly activated, because basically your client is struggling with stabilizing. So then they're like, I don't know, and their feet turn out, and it tries to give them like a wider base of support. That is also exactly true in your popliteus as well. Your popliteus is this little knee stabilizer, this little itty bitty knee stabilizer that lives just behind the back of the knee. This itty bitty short muscle right back here that kind of runs across. If your knee has bad stabilization, your feet will also sometimes turn out. But you're not often going to see those muscles on the list. Honestly, guys, the simple ones you're going to see are the soleus, lateral gastrocnemius, and then you need to strengthen your medial gastrocnemius and medial hamstring. That'll get you back to neutral. Now, if we see our clients' knees cave in, you know, which is our frontal plane problem here, right? This is going to be caused by overactive adductors, right? Those muscles that cause, you know, literally hip adduction, right? So knees moving inward, right? We're looking at this top column or this top row here. That's going to be tight adductor complex. We're also going to see a tight biceps femoris short head. Now, that's not an adductor, but again, that biceps femoris short head it's an internal, or I'm sorry, it's an external rotator for your lower leg. So it does tibial external rotation, which basically means, yeah, right here, what we're seeing with the foot turned this way. So that happens when your knee is actually able to unlock. So what we're seeing here, right? This is, yeah, actually this is great. This is tibial external rotation right here. So again, we got a client whose feet are turning out and knees are kind of caving inward. So why would this external tibial rotation cause the knee to cave in? Well, your knee have these big condyles on them. So when your client does that, what ends up happening is they end up in this kind of posture like this, where the knee is adducting inwards from the adductor complex, and then the leg is internally rotating this way, and the feet are falling forward towards the midline as well. So that's what's causing, that's what we're seeing in clients who have this like feet turn out, knees cave in situation, or even just the knees cave in situation. It's often, yeah, you can kind of see right here, right? So biceps femoris short head, that hamstring muscle, you know, which lives right here behind the back of the knee on the outside portion of the thigh. Actually, you can even see it. See the little divot right there? This person's contracting when they do that. You can actually see that biceps femoris contract. That's what draws the tibia this way. We're also going to see the TFL. That's your tensor fascial latae. Remember, that's a hip internal rotator, which when we see, you know, that is this little muscle right here. Where'd it go? I had it and then I closed it. It's this little section right in here. That's a hip flexor, but it's also a hip internal rotator. So you're going to see, if you look at knee valgus, right, again, it's hip internal rotation, right? It's rotating around this way. The bones are literally falling inward. So those are the big ones: adductor complex, biceps femoris, and TFL. But the knees cave in can also be caused. So how do we fix those muscles? We're gonna inhibit them. We're gonna inhibit them through foam rolling techniques, right? We're gonna foam roll on those muscles. If it's your adductor complex, you're gonna do this, right? You're basically gonna get on that foam roller sideways, kind of like we saw in the video, right? Or if it's the TFL, we'll do this version. So you'll basically get right onto the hip, just like that. Or if it's your biceps femoris short head, this is a bit of a challenging one. This honestly doesn't work very well with a foam roller. You can kind of do this version where he's kind of sitting, you know, he's kind of rotated slightly, so he's exposing the outside portion of the thigh. But that honestly doesn't work very well. Instead, oh, come on. There we go. Instead, we can use a lacrosse ball, and that can get right behind the back of the knee there a little bit more effectively than a foam roller can. So the way we're gonna fix these problems, right? We're gonna inhibit all those overactive muscles. All of the overactive muscles. These are the muscles that you need to inhibit and lengthen. And then we also see tightness in the vastus lateralis. That's your quadricep muscle that, you know, is allowing that knee to kind of rotate. It's the lateral quadricep muscle. So on the outside here, it's working together with the biceps femoris to cause that rotational movement. So, you know, these muscles on the opposite sides of the bone are actually working together here. We're also going to see the lateral gastric nemus, again, in the knees cave out. That's going to be overactive. So we need to inhibit all of these overactive muscles and then lengthen those overactive muscles out in order to get them back to neutral. Once we've done that, we can flip to the other side of the joint and start activating our underactive muscles. So for the gluteus medius, that's where, you know, we're going to do, you know, that's a hip abductor, right? It's on the side of your butt. This is literally your side glute muscle. So it's in charge of abducting your thigh away, totally the exact opposite of the adductor complex. This and this are direct antagonists to one another. So turn this guy off, turn this guy on, right? We're going to see the gluteus maximus, which is exactly the opposite of the TFL. That's a hip extensor. We're going to see the vastus medialis oblique. That's the opposite of your vastus lateralis. You've got the medial side and the lateral side. You can see your medial hamstring, which is not the opposite of your biceps femoris. It is in this case, but it's a helper muscle, right? Like they're synergist to one another, right? Both of these hamstring muscles work for knee flexion, but one does external and one does internal. We're doing too much external, turn it off. We need more internal, right? So you can see in some situations we've got altered reciprocal inhibition, and in other situations we have got synergistic dominance. Our job, it doesn't matter what it is that they're dealing with, is to turn off the overactive stuff and turn on the underactive stuff. So that is the anterior view. Now, sometimes you will also see knees caving out, which you can see right here. So if we've got a client whose knees are caving out, which is a pretty rare thing, we call this knee varus instead of knee valgus. It's where you'll see a client who has this sort of bow-legged posture. So it actually looks something kind of like this, where their femur is really not sitting at the angle it's supposed to. We want a slight angle here. We just don't want a super intense angle, but this is like flat. So this is a problem you're not going to run into very often, guys, but it can happen. So if you've got a client whose knees are caving outward, we need to look at like which muscles are causing that. So again, this is not going to be in your regular textbook, but this is something you are going to see in capstone once you guys get there. So what's causing the knees to kind of bow out like that? Well, one of the muscles that's going to do that is your piriformis, which is this little short muscle that lives underneath your glutes. So your piriformis is actually a little stabilizer muscle that lives right back here. It attaches from your sacrum to your femur. It's actually, it does a slight amount of hip abduction, which is why, again, we're kind of seeing with like the knees cave out, you know, that is sort of abduction there, right? I don't know why I even did the cave out, because that's always going to pull up the wrong picture. Knee varus. So we can kind of see this bow-legged posture here where there's like a really big gap, right? That's going to sometimes be your piriformis. It's also going to be your biceps femoris again, but in this time, it's not just the short head, it's literally the entire thing. We're going to see the TFL again, because this is also being caused by like a little bit of hip flexion. And then we're going to see your gluteus minimus, which we don't talk about very often. Like this is a muscle that we don't discuss all that often. Oops. I don't know what I just looked up. But the gluteus minimus actually lives underneath your gluteus maximus. So we're actually seeing some glute muscles be tight here. This is, okay, here we go. This is the picture I need. So there's your piriformis. It's overactive. Your gluteus medius is going to be overactive. And then your gluteus minimus, which lives right underneath that medius, is also going to be slightly overactive. So gluteus minimus, gluteus medius. This is the only time you will ever say you've got overactive glutes, is when you have a client whose knees cave out. Now, that doesn't mean that they have overactive glutes in all directions. They just have overactive medial glutes. So this person's really good at lateral movements because they're very, very good at doing this, right? But they're doing it too much and it's tightening up. Generally, guys, when clients have this problem, they will also have a lot of like sciatica problems where they're getting like pain that kind of shoots down the leg. Often because that piriformis tightens up. And when we see the piriformis tighten up, we can end up with what's called piriformis syndrome, where basically that muscle starts pinching this sciatic nerve right here. And so then that pain travels down the leg and you kind of feel it and it's not so great. Yeah, you can kind of see that right there. So, excuse me. Our probable overactive muscles are all the muscles that are caving our knees outward. And all of our underactive muscles, we're going to see the adductor complex here, right? Those adductor muscles, which have been a bad guy, you know, in our little overhead squat story so far, are actually underactive. They're actually not doing enough work. The medial hamstring is not doing enough work. That one, again, that's often just a muscle that's just very commonly underactive. And then the gluteus maximus. The reason they're caving out is because they're trying to use their glutes. And that gluteus medius, which is a synergist, is taking over for this weakened gluteus maximus. So again, we are going to strengthen these things, right? We're going to write a program that involves stretching our overactive stuff and foam rolling, and a program that strengthens our underactive stuff. Now, obviously, I said there are other compensations. We've got low back arching, low back rounding, arms falling forward, asymmetric shifts. these are all the things that we're going to look through. The overhead squat conversation is a long one, and there are a lot of muscles you guys have to get memorized. So we're actually going to move away from the overhead squat now, and we are going to move into the single leg squat. Then Monday, when we pick up, we are actually going to go through our next portion of the assessments, which are pushing and pulling assessments, but we'll sort of circle back and take a look at some of that overhead squat again. So we're going to have overhead squat every single day for the rest of this course, as we're sort of analyzing these different postural distortions. But the next type of assessment that you're going to look at is the single leg squat assessment. So the single leg squat assessment is very similar to the overhead squat, except that this is designed to assess your ankle proprioception, your core strength, and your hip joint stability. Basically, this is how we're looking to see, does our client like stabilize while they are moving, right? So both of these are movement assessments. If you had a client who just absolutely nails their overhead squat, they do it perfectly, well, then we can put a little bit more stress on the body by giving them the single leg squat, right? So instruct your client to stand with their hands placed on their hips and focus on an object across the room straight forward. Their ankle should be in a neutral position, pointed straight ahead, just like the overhead squat. And you're going to have their lumbopelvic hip complex and knees in a neutral position before they start squatting down. Instruct your client to raise one leg and accept all the weight on their stance leg, and then have them squat to a comfortable position for about 3 to 5 reps. And on this, guys, we are only looking from one view. We are just observing from the anterior view. We're not looking for arching. We're not looking for any of that stuff. We're basically just looking to see how well their ankle, knee, and hip are able to isometrically stabilize as they do like a balancing exercise. So our observation view is literally just going to be the anterior view, and we're looking for one thing. And you're asking yourself, does your client's knee cave in? If their knee caves in, guess what? They're going to have an overactive muscles list, and they're going to have an underactive muscles list. And you'll notice these lists are actually identical to when our knees caved in during the overhead squat. We see a tight adductor complex. We see a tight biceps femoris short head, TFL, right? So adductor complex on the inner thigh. Sorry, we'll go to this version. Adductor complex on the inner thigh, TFL, that's an internal hip rotator. Biceps femoris short head, that's an external tibial rotator. You can see the tibia is external compared to the thigh now, right? Vastus lateralis, which is on the outside portion of the quadricep, which is working with that biceps femoris. And then we're going to see the lateral gastrocnemius, that outside calf muscle here, right? So all that stuff, which is on the outside, is pulling, which is causing this internal rotation to occur because those muscles refuse to let go. So that is basically the list. Do we have any weird questions about any of the anatomy or any of those muscles? You know, where they are, how they work, anything like that? How's everybody feeling about that?
I'm good.
Yeah.
But when you say, how do we feel about that? Or, you know, because this is my first class. Are we supposed to have them memorized where those muscles are already?
No, but I do want you to kind of start getting an idea of like the concepts, right? Like I'm not necessarily, you don't have to have these muscles like memorized. That's pretty tough. That takes time. But like what I want you to, like if you can picture why like these muscles are pulling and that's causing the bone to sort of alter its range of motion, right? As long as we get that concept, I think you're in a good place.
Okay.
Yeah.
I get that. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, memorization, that's gonna take a while. But here's the thing. This is what's gonna help with that. We're gonna look at it from a very, very different perspective now. Let's take a look here and write a program for a client whose knees are caving in, right? So let's say we've got a client whose knees are caving in, right? So we go back to that knee cave in action. We know that the tight muscles there are going to be the adductors, which are pulling too much. So guess what? This needs to go in our warm-up as a stretch. The biceps femoris needs to go into our warm-up as a stretch. The TFL needs to go into our warm-up as a stretch, right? We're basically going to try to stretch all of these overactive muscles. And then we are going to strengthen in our first little movement prep section down here. We're going to try to turn on our underactive muscles. So if we look here, our first muscle that's overactive on the list, actually, sorry, I don't have these in a very good order. The first muscle we'll look at, we see the lateral gastrocnemius. So we are going to foam roll. We're going to SMR the calves, right? And then I would probably put a coaching tip in. I would say like special emphasis on the outside of the calf, right? That's going to make sure that they really do get on that lateral gastrocnemius instead of the medial, right? They're not just rolling their calves in general, they're rolling the outside portion of the calf. They're also going to foam roll their hamstrings, right? So then I also want that to be their biceps femoris short head, which is a hamstring muscle. So special emphasis on the outside of the calf and hamstring, right? That's where I want them to put most of that pressure, is on the outside portion. Then we're going to have them foam roll their TFL because that tensor fasciae latae is overactive. And then we are definitely going to have them foam roll their adductors, right? Those adductor muscles are going to be very tightened up, so we need to loosen them, right? So now we've sort of loosened everything up. We've untied some of the knots. Now we need to follow that up by lengthening out these muscles to make sure they don't tighten up again. So we are going to do a wall calf stretch, which is going to look kind of like this. That's going to stretch out. That's going to stretch out our lateral gastrocnemius, right? So right here, she's stretching her lateral gastrocnemius. She could also do this version. Both those are actually pretty good. I personally think this is a little bit better. Then she's going to do a standing biceps femoris stretch. So this stretch is kind of a pain in the butt, but this is right for the back of that hamstring. Looks a little weird. I know it doesn't look like your traditional like touch your toes hamstring stretch, but trust me, guys, this muscle is an internal rotator. So what you're doing here, it kind of looks like you're internally rotating when you take your thigh across the body like this. But if you look at the relationship here, right? Like her body's going this way, it's rotating this way. That rotational movement is external rotation. She's stretching the outside part of her hamstring here. This is your biceps femoris stretch. And it's brutal. It's my least favorite stretch in the world. It hurts so bad. I'd much rather touch my toes any day of the week than do this stretch. There's kind of your classic hamstring, right? But this is the biceps femoris. So you can see medial hamstring stretch, biceps femoris stretch. Very rarely do we need to stretch our medial hamstring. Oftentimes it's the biceps femoris that's the overactive muscle here. And oftentimes this is underactive. So stretching it really doesn't do much for you. If anything, it can actually make your problems worse. So then once we've done that static biceps femoris stretch, we're gonna do a standing TFL stretch. This is gonna loosen up that hip muscle that we talked about, right? So what does your TFL do? Well, your TFL, oh God, it's pixelated. I don't like that version. All right, we'll go with this one, but she's not stretching very far. What does your TFL do? Actually, yeah, no, she's also not turning her foot out. I think this is like an image. We'll just go to the video here. I think this is an image before she turns her foot. Yeah, there we go. See now, okay, yeah. So now she turns her foot out. So this is a TFL stretch. So what she's going to do, right, your TFL is a hip flexor. So what she's doing is she's drawing her back leg into hip extension. It's also an internal rotator. So she is turning her foot into external rotation, right? So basically that's how you stretch it, right? You take your leg back behind you and turn the foot away. And then you also lean a little bit, and that's going to stretch out that TFL. So that is that the last one? Oh, and then we want to do a static standing adductor stretch, obviously. So the knees are caving in and the adductors are pulling too much. We got to turn those freaking things off. So we do this kind of side lunge stretch, right? We take this big step to the side, and that's going to stretch out that adductor, right? That inner thigh muscle. It's a really gentle one. Not this version, by the way. This stretch sucks. Don't do this. Everybody does this stretch. It puts way too much pressure on your spine. It is just not great. I do like this though. Horse stance. That's also a really good adductor stretch if you can, handle it. So now we have stretched out the overactive stuff, right? Now that stuff is all sort of turned off. And there's our movement prep. We've got our client set up for one set, 30 seconds each. We throw them on the elliptical for 5 minutes, kind of get their blood pumping after that. Then we're going to go try to turn on their underactive muscles. So we need to flip to the other side of the joint, right? So we know that TFL, which is a hip flexor, was overactive. So what do we need to do to strengthen our underactive muscle? Well, we need to do something that involves hip extension. The classic example of a really good core exercise that focuses primarily on hip extension is our floor bridge. This right here is literally hip extension, right? You are squeezing your glutes. That's going to sort of work against that TFL. Now, because our client is a knee cave inner, feet turn outer, right? If this person, we're going to definitely instruct them, like they might have the natural tendency where their foot wants to turn this way. We've got to make sure that while we are instructing them, they keep their toes pointing straight forward. We are also going to do a modified side iso abs with HIB. That should say hip. Good job, me. Past me had a spelling error. Modified side iso abs with hip abduction. Big complicated name. It's a side plank with a leg raise, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to lay our client on their side like this, and they're going to raise that thigh up and down. Now, there is this version too, but that's not getting very much core work. So I like the modified side iso abs. Yeah, like I don't hate this version, guys. Like you can totally do this. But I find that like this version here, let's get some core work in there, let's get the abs working, right? So we take our client into a side plank with hip abduction. And that's going to be a little bit better. This version right here, that leg's moving up and down. She's getting a little bit of like core stabilization, and she's getting a little bit of that gluteus medius activated, which is one of our underactive muscles. We are also going to do a single leg balance with reach. So this is a terrific exercise that focuses on like developing your balance while also strengthening your gluteus medius, right? So she goes to the front. That doesn't do much for your gluteus medius. But this version, she goes to the side, and then she goes to the back. That's your gluteus medius and your gluteus maximus. I would probably just take the front part of this movement out of it and say, let's focus on frontal and transverse plane movements. And that way, rather than going like sagittally like this, she's just going to go here and here, here and here, right? And we're turning the glutes on. Is it the hardest glute exercise in the world? No, not even a little, right? But if I've got my client doing like a barbell squat later on in the workout, I want to do something like this first, because that is going to turn on our underactive muscles, right? I'm going to get the right part of my glutes activated. This is why we call this movement prep. You are literally prepping the body for doing the more intense exercise. And then just like in the video we watched, we're going to do a squat jump with stabilization. There's just a really great way to teach your client how to develop proprioception and get used to landing with those toes forward and knees not caving in. right? So by landing and stabilize, they could also do a box jump to stabilization. This is also a really good option. But by landing with those, she's got a little bit of an asymmetric shift here. But by landing with the toes forward and not letting the knees cave in, or let's say they do land improperly. Let's say maybe they do land with their feet turned out, but then telling them like, hey, don't move. Now turn the feet in. And then they come up out of their squat. By doing that, you're literally going, it's like training a dog, it's like, you are continually teaching them how to move properly. Wow, look at that. That is a great single leg exercise. That's awesome. He's on a freaking dyna disc there. Oh, wait, no, that's a plate. Still good, but that's not as hard as I thought it was. I thought that was like a wobbly, ball. So, that's how we kind of write programs, right? You'll notice what we've done, like Cody, you were asking, like, how do we fix that, right? How do we fix these problems that our clients have? Well, this is how we do it. We stretch the overactive stuff, which inhibits it and turns it off. And then we strengthen the overactive stuff. Strengthen the underactive stuff. And that draws us back to neutral, right? So when we look at that, overactive, underactive muscle situation, right? Now I've basically applied my stretches over here, and I've applied my strengthening exercises over here. And hopefully that has drawn my joint back to neutral. Now my client can work out. Now, I look at the rest of this workout template here. I'd be like, let's do some squats. Let's do some lunges. Let's do a shoulder press. Let's do a lateral raise, and there we go. We've got a great shoulder and leg day, and we turned everything that we needed to turn on so that like while we're doing these exercises, the right muscles are being recruited instead of the wrong ones, right? So that actually kind of wraps things up today. Like I said, not tomorrow, Monday, we'll be taking a look at day 9. So on Monday, we'll be looking at lumbopelvic hip dysfunction, but we'll also be looking at the pushing and the pulling assessment. So not a lot of PowerPoint slides, but we'll look at like examples for how to work on the upper body. Because today we kind of looked a lot at the lower body. We are eventually going to get through the entire overhead squat as we get through the rest of this class, and we will be looking at all of these muscles. So Lorianne, like I said, you don't necessarily have to have these muscles memorized just yet, but conceptually, it's like, okay, I know that these muscles are causing the knees to cave in. So what do I want to do? I want to strengthen this stuff out here to pull the knees out. And I want to stretch this stuff in here to allow the knees to pull out and get my client back to neutral. Keep that concept, guys, and you're going to be in really good shape. Too many trainers forget. Too many trainers, like, they're just like, well, I'm going to go take my client to the gym and burn a bunch of calories. It's not bad to do that, but you're not addressing any of their postural distortions. And that's about it. You guys got any questions?
All good here. Have a great weekend.
All righty, sounds good. All right, guys, I'll kick you all out of here. We do have homework number 2 going out today, so please knock that out for